Throughout the course, we've tried to strike a balance between teaching to the test and teaching what we think are the most important elements of art history, not always quite the same in our opinion. So forgive us, but today and really throughout our review time, it's going to be all about the test. When the test is over, you can get back to analyzing and appreciating great art, which is what the course is about. Meanwhile, I want to give you a quick overview of the structure of the revamped AP test. As you see here, half of your score will be determined by 80 multiple choice questions. Now, the College Board is trying to move away from purely factual recall questions to more analytical comparative questions. And that means that reading and interpreting the question will be a lot more challenging. In fact, if you tune out right after I say this, you still will have heard the most important thing I have to say. Read the questions very carefully. That is true of the essay questions and of the multiple choice. Over the course of the year, you've seen a lot of College Board sample questions from the new curriculum, as well as other people's guesses about what questions from the new curriculum will look like. You're going to revisit a lot of those questions on your 2 second semester finals, one of which is an actual College Board practice test. So let's look at just a few actual College Board sample questions, focusing on how the questions are structured and strategies you should use for tackling them. So here's an example from the College Board's course description. But please remember that you're the first group to take the exam under the new format. So the various College Board samples notwithstanding, we don't know exactly what's waiting for you in May. Anyway, back to this question. Note first that the question is vocabulary dense and wordy. At least some of the questions I've seen are too wordy, at least in my opinion. I think the College Board sometimes confuses complex reasoning with complicated sentences, and we're just going to have to live with that. But before you drown in a deluge of words, realize that you know all of these terms, or at least you should. For this question, the most important term is formal qualities. That means the question is asking about the way the work is made and the stylistic techniques the artist uses. It is not a question about content or meaning, about historical context, or about its function or use. So, remind each other of what the following terms mean. That is the terms that I have underlined in the prompt. Contoured images means there is a defined boundary edge. Here are a few works that have a defined contour, and note that in the screen, some of the contour is a rather incongruous pale blue. The 2 works on top depict shallow space. We don't have much of a sense of background depth or perspective. Giotto on the bottom left shows the beginning of a movement toward deeper space. And by the way, Roman painting also captured deeper perspective. We'll see an example in a minute. This is not, therefore, merely a modern phenomenon. The landscape by Velasco on the bottom right, by contrast, stretches out into the horizon, into deep space. Artists employ aerial perspective by showing objects becoming fainter and bluer as they recede into the background. On the upper left, you actually see a photograph which shows this phenomenon. Note that the painting on the bottom right is, as I just mentioned, a Roman fresco from the House of the Veti in Pompeii. The other image, of course, is from Cézanne. And speaking of whom, I just found this slide, thanks Google. Saturated colors are vivid and intense. Unsaturated colors come closer to gray. So value, remember, is lightness or darkness. Hue is basically the name of the color, red, blue, yellow, green, etc. So, are the colors in the work on the right saturated? I'm not sure I'd really say so. The brightness comes from the gold more than from the paint colors. But why doesn't that matter anyway? The key to answering this question quickly and accurately is to know that the Theotokos and Child with Saints George and Theodore is a Byzantine icon. It was created with encaustic on wood. Do you remember encaustic? That's pigment mixed with wax. But what's really important here is that manuscripts aren't painted on wood. At this point in European art history, they aren't even painted on paper, a technology which hasn't made its way this far west from China. Soon, Islamic manuscripts will start showing up on paper, but even our required folio from the Quran is painted on parchment or animal skin. So once you recognize that the work is A, Byzantine, and B, an icon, then only choices A and B become possible. Aerial perspective is used for deep spaces, and we don't see any here. So A is an easy choice, but note that D is a very tempting choice if you don't remember that the work is an icon, because clearly the figures are frontal and flattened. C is also tempting because the work clearly uses a lot of gold leaf. So knowing that this is not a manuscript, that it's an icon, really speeds up the process and keeps you out of trouble. You'll notice that very often you can eliminate two answers quickly, but only if you possess a key piece of information. That's why it's good to keep reviewing the basic information about your required works. And notice, too, that there are deliberate distractors. To some extent, you're being led to choose the wrong answer. So as you review each work, try to come up with some quick formal descriptions. How does the artist use line, volume, space, color, focal point? This rhythm, this will help you fix these images in your head for the essays as well. Another question. The College Board really wants you to think about the artist's intention, and often that involves the viewer's intended response. The key to answering this question correctly is to remember the function of icons. Iconoclasts claimed the Christians were actually worshiping these images, and sometimes that may actually have been true. But what the church taught was that these icons created a prayerful spirit and a connection with the holy figures, especially saints and Virgin Mary. Church and state weren't separated in Byzantine Europe, and art was often intended to bolster imperial power. But the figures on the icon of the Virgin, St. Theodore and St. George, no emperors surround the Virgin's throne. Another question. Now, I actually complained about this question on the college, on the AP art history teacher listserv, and other teachers joined in the complaint. The correct answer is late antique Egyptian funerary portraiture. I've added an example on the bottom right. Now, these funerary portraits, too, were painted in encaustic on wood, and you will note the similarity in facial features and composition, but also note that the question asks about materials and art-making process. You can write in the test booklet. You may want to underline the key word in a question as you read it to stay focused. The reason I complained is that no Egyptian funerary portraiture appeared on the College Board list. They were probably trying to get it encaustic and may have just forgotten that there were not other encaustic portrait works. The best clue to the answer is probably that the icon was located in the monastery of St. Catherine, Mount Sinai, Egypt. That's a pretty obscure identifier, but it would obviously help to know it. But the figures also somewhat resemble Roman wall paintings. So you see an example from Pompeii on the bottom left. Why do you know that can't be the right answer? Those were frescoes, not encaustic. Note that one of the ways questions may be designed to trick you into choosing one of the distractor answers that contain some true information, but aren't the best answer to the specific question. This question is asking about technique. Anyway, there are going to be questions that make you mad and make me mad. The good news is that everybody is in the same boat and that you can miss a fair number of questions and still earn a passing score on this test. So look for clues. In this case, Egypt was your best clue. Choose an answer and move on. Do not leave answers blank. You lose no points for wrong answers, so you should always guess. When you get to the end of the test, if you're running out of time and you haven't been able to fill out answers, choose a letter, A, B, C, D, and fill in the rest of the blanks. Have you noticed that some of the issues and tricks arose with review quizzes that I've posted? Please, when you take these review quizzes, don't just memorize the right answer in case that's one of the quizzes you get stuck with in class. Take the time to read the explanations. They will help jog your memory and add to the information on your hard drive. But even more important, this is really a major reason why I included them, they will help you learn to recognize the cue words and questions and how not to fall for distractors. I don't like all of those questions either, but I think they will help prepare you. So here is a short 15-minute essay from the College Board sample questions, and this is actually one of the few you haven't seen and written on. The College Board underlined one key word, both. What's a similar key word that they did not underline? And. You need to talk about design, function, and setting of the unknown work on top and how it's similar to that of the Taj Mahal. So you have to talk about both works, especially when you get to that last question. So here's the point where you take a deep breath, maybe even say a brief prayer of thanks, because the wording of the question and the photo give you most of what you need to answer the first part of the question. What function do they share? Well, they're both tombs. Despite the minarets, the Taj Mahal was not a mosque, but rather Shah Jahan's tomb for his favorite wife and later himself. And note, that answer is right in the prompt. Do not restate the prompt. Do not rewrite the first sentence, but by all means, use any information you're given. So, and I realize this isn't going to be easy to read, here is the scoring rubric for this question with my underlining of those 3 points. Aha, you do get 1 point each for design, for function, and for setting. So, what could you say about design? Okay, you'll probably find this a little terrifying. I did. The scoring guidelines include terms you long since forgotten, and many, this is the part that scares me, that I didn't teach. But remember that this is just 1 point in a 5-point, 15-minute essay. You are not expected to write a novel. Your reader is not expecting a lengthy paragraph like the one you see on top. A few quick points will do. By the way, I should say quick points in complete sentences, something I forgot to put in my notes, but let me mention now, please. Make it easier for your reader to read the essay. Answer the questions in the order they are given. Do not bullet them and write in complete sentences, but I would separate each part of the answer into a separate paragraph. Leave a space. In fact, maybe leave some extra space in case you have time to go back and write more. At any rate, back to this answer. The bulbous dome is easy, right? The use of cut stone for decorative images is obvious as well, even if you don't mention Pietro Dura, and I don't remember whether or not I taught that term way back when. You do know what an Iwan is. You encounter them with the mosque at Isfahan as well, and that's actually a feature you might well have to know. So throwing in an art history term like Iwan would give some weight to your response. It would signal to your reader you know what you're talking about. Also, the walled garden and waterway leading perpendicular to the tombs are fairly obvious similarities. Now, remember, in a question like this, use the image, be as specific as possible, use as many art history terms as possible. Let me make a few other points, all of which you've heard before. Please, and please again, answer the specific question. Don't just download everything you remember about the work. Write in complete, clear sentences. And if you can, write with active voice. So it would be active to say the artist portrays violence. It would be passive to say violence is portrayed in this work. You're not going to get marked down for that, but it's going to make your essay read better. Don't use the pronoun you, and try not to use the pronoun I. This is a formal essay, not a social media post. Finally, always back up your point with evidence. Often, as I just said, it's right there in the image. So next, what could you say about function? Another scary slide and more information you've forgotten or never learned. Again, keep in mind you will not be expected to know details about a work that wasn't required. So don't panic that you don't know what Humayun's wife was up to. But you do know that the work on the left was a tomb. The question says so. If you stop to read carefully and did not succumb to panic, that's when you talk about how both buildings functions as tomb, and then you add the information about Shah Jahan's favorite wife, which I'm betting you do remember. You might also recall that Mughal rulers used Islam to bolster their claim to rule, hence the resemblance to a throne. Rulers, by the way, almost always use religion to help bolster their right to rule. Next, what about setting? Again, you don't need to remember all this or know all this information. You can talk about the gardens, the fountains, the impressive approach, and you'll almost certainly get the point. Remember to make specific references back to the image. Describe what you see. Don't misinterpret me. If you remember more specific information or precise art historical terms, by all means include these in your essay. But Alas, I did not teach you about Shahar Bagh or the Fourfold Garden, although now you know. We did talk about the role of gardens and fountains in this and other Islamic works such as the Alhambra. So, last question. How do both works reflect the Islamic vision of paradise? So some of these details actually showed up in that Islamic art and architecture video we watched long, long ago in a semester far, far away. But you know that water, flowers, and gardens feature prominently in Islamic art, right? So it's pretty clear that these are elements of paradise. You also know that every mosque has a fountain for ritual cleansing. By the way, the 4 rivers and eightfold paradise would be nice details to remember. But the real key to getting both points is to make sure you talk about both works. All of the detail in the world on the Taj Mahal will gain you only 1 point. Okay, you've seen this question before, and drum rolls, you still have time to write extra credit essays about up to 3 works answering this question. Those questions are up on Moodle, and I will only close them the morning of the AP exam. So, which work should you choose to answer this question? The College Board lists these 3. Any of these choices would be fine, and they have a huge advantage, which is that you know the College Board considers them appropriate works for answering the question. So what's the disadvantage of choosing one of the College Board's recommended works? Well, first, it means you have to come up with 2 additional identifiers. Usually that's not going to be hard. Sometimes maybe it will be. Second, and I actually think this is the more significant disadvantage, your grader will be reading lots of essays about these suggested works. AP readers are very conscientious, but they're human, so they'll appreciate a little variety. In fact, if you can think of an appropriate work that's not even on the College Board list, I think that could make a terrific choice, depending, of course, on whether it fit the question. Please remember the most important thing about picking a work to answer these general long questions. It really has to be a good choice for answering whatever specific question you got. Does anyone remember what I suggested for this question way back at the beginning of the course when I was first talking about the structure of the AP exam? Bet not. I suggested Donatello's statue of Judith and Holofernes, which we had just discussed. Think about the way the leaders of Florence, that is Cosimo de' Medici, the fellow who commissioned the work, wanted to remind the people of Florence that they needed to protect their liberty against foreign bullies. As you go through your workbooks for review, you might refresh your memory of works that Ms. Jacobs and I required, but the College Board did not. Works from your textbook that aren't on the list would also make good choices. And that brings me to one more review point. We did not assign the final thematic chapters of your textbook. We simply ran out of time. But you might think about reading or at least skimming them for ideas, and I actually think it's easy reading and fun. Okay, Ms. Jacobs will be handing out the complete scoring guidelines for this question, and I really hope you'll take the time to study these 5 pages. Lots of information, I realize, and not easy reading, but it's a great way not only to learn more about this work, which is one the College Board seems to love, but also to get a better idea of what the College Board is going to be looking for on these long essays. I'm hoping you have a little time before you write your essay to talk about how you would tackle this question. I just don't know. So if you do, how do you think Viola uses water conceptually to transmit meaning? So here are just a few comments based on the College Board scoring guidelines. Remember that there are 2 separate screens, but a single soundtrack. So viewers perceive the sound differently depending on which scenario they're watching. The response might also note that in creating this work, Viola cited his childhood experience of almost drowning as the most beautiful and without fear. I can't actually remember whether that information was in either my podcast or your homework reading. I, too, am getting tired at the end of the course. To continue from the College Board, for Viola, water, and presumably fire as well, acts as a barrier between this world and the next, suggesting a search for the meaning of existence. The crossing also uses water to connect the ordinary world with one that transcends everyday experience, a world that is perhaps spiritual. The use of technology in the crossing may allude to the disconnect between our ordinary contemporary lives and our primordial spiritual beings. With projected images, the viewer is spared the physical sensations of heat and moisture. Finally, the use of video technology enables the artist to show water moving, events changing over time. And here you see the works that the College Board suggests as possible candidates for comparison. If you have time, and since we just studied it, what similarities and differences do these works suggest in the conceptual use of water to transmit meaning? And I would suggest starting with the spiral jetty again, since we just studied it. By the way, I think this is a hard question. You almost certainly have more to say than you realize, but 30 minutes isn't much time to organize your thoughts and write an essay. We'll practice some brainstorming in further review sessions, but I really encourage you to do this on your own as well, perhaps with questions from a review book. Back at the beginning of the course, I showed you this slide, and I promised that we would not send you into that exam room in May unprepared for what you were going to encounter. But I also noted that just how prepared you feel depends at least as much on your thought and effort as it does on what we've managed to teach in the course of a year. At this point, you have a week or more to review. That's not enough time to make up for a year of skipping homework or spacing out in class, but it is enough time, if you didn't make those choices or didn't make them often, it is enough time to drag information you've buried deep in your mental hard drive onto your mental desktop, ready to draw on quickly on exam day. Also, way back in August, I made this promise. By May, you will be amazed at the places you've been and the art you have seen and by how much you know. In the end, Ms. Jacobs and I care a whole lot more about starting you off on a lifelong love affair with art than we do about what you score on the AP test. So hang in there, work hard this last week, and then get on with the rest of what we hope is an art-filled life.